We are continuing our study of Judges today, so we're going to pick up from where we left off. We're going to pick up in the 4th chapter of the book of Judges, starting in the first verse of that chapter. Listen now for the word of the Lord. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, after Ehud died. So the Lord sold them into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. The Israelites cried out to the Lord for help, but he had 900 chariots of iron and had oppressed the Israelites cruelly for 20 years. At that time, Deborah the prophetess, wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came up to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take position at Mount Tabor. Bring 10,000 of the tribe of Naphtali and the tribe of Zebulun. I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the Wadi Kishon, with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand." Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she said, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory. For the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." Then Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 warriors went up behind him, and Deborah went up with him. Now Heber the Kenite had separated from the other Kenites, that is, the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and had encamped as far away as Elon Bezanan Ganaim, which is near Kadesh. And when Sisera was told that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the troops who were with him, from Harosheth Hagoyim to the Wadi Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Up, for this is the day on which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. The Lord is indeed going out before you." So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 warriors following him, and the Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots and all his army into a panic before Barak. Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot, while Barak pursued the chariots and the army of Harosheth Hagoyim. All the army of Sisera fell by the sword. No one was left. Now Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between King Jabin of Hazor and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, have no fear." So then he turned aside to her tent, and she covered him with a rug. Then he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. And he said to her, "Stand at the entrance of the tent, and if anybody comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say no." But Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground. He was lying fast asleep from weariness, and he died. Then as Barak came in pursuit of Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." So he went into her tent, and there was Sisera lying dead with a tent peg in his temple. So on that day God subdued King Jabin of Canaan before the Israelites. Then the hand of the Israelites were harder and harder on King Jabin of Canaan until they destroyed Jabin of Canaan. And the land had rest 40 years. This is the word of the Lord. Hopefully, if you've been here for any of the previous sermons on Judges, you're starting to recognize some of the motifs, some of the repeated themes, like a fairy tale, how the stories always begin once upon a time and then end happily ever after. The stories in Judges have a repeated theme and motif. So this story begins with the motif that the others have as well. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And it continues with the story of the judge, the Redeemer, who is there to redeem Israel from the travails, the bad situation that they've gotten themselves into. In this case, Deborah, a judge who sits in the hill country of Ephraim. And it ends with that phrase, "and the land had rest 40 years." The motifs, the bracket of the story letting us know that this is the whole tale of this particular judge, and this is the whole story of that. This story is one of the most famous and one of the oldest in the book of Judges, one of the oldest in the whole Bible, actually. I read to you all of chapter 4, and I missed a good chunk of chapter 5 for time. But that most of chapter 5 is a song written by Deborah, and scholars agree that this song is possibly the oldest thing in the whole Bible. It's the way that they judge that and tell that is by the words that are used and how archaic the vocabulary is, because languages change over time, just like you can read, like Beowulf or something in Old or Middle English and see how different English has changed over the years. You can do the same thing in Hebrew, so they can tell how old roughly the language is that are in the psalm, and they can tell that the language of this song is very ancient. It's very ancient. It came from well before. That and songs are, of course, a great way of remembering things. They're a great mnemonic device, a way of remembering things. And so in oral cultures and traditions, songs and poems are a primary way of remembering things, which means that they tend to have been part of the oral culture long before they were ever written down. They were probably around centuries and centuries before they were ever written down. So many scholars believe that this song may have come actually from the time of Deborah herself, maybe even have been written by Deborah. It's very ancient. This way that songs work as a mnemonic device is a fun one. It's an easy one to always demonstrate. It depends on your generation which are the good songs to use to remember it by, but I always think it's fun to use advertising jingles. Does anyone remember Plop, Plop, Fizz, Fizz? Or there's always ones that you can pick out that just depends on whether you need to go back to the 70s or 80s or 90s or when it is you want to pick it out. But you pick out an advertising jingle and sing it, and almost invariably you'll find people in the group who are like, oh yeah, I remember that. It gets stuck in your head. That's why the advertisers use it. It gets stuck in your head. It helps you remember it. So this very ancient text, this very ancient song, tells us a story about a woman, Deborah, who is a remarkable woman. She is a general. She is a leader. She raises an army. She plans a battle. She gives orders to men. They follow them faithfully, without fear. She plans the time and day and place for the battle to happen, sets up an ambush and a strategy for her opponent, who is a superior force. She's fighting against a general named Sisera, who has an army of 900 iron chariots, and the people of Israel can't match that. They've just got shepherds and foot people. They've got people with spears and slings, not people with chariots and horses. So they're fighting against a superior force that has oppressed them and beat them for 20 years, and Deborah has to come up with a strategy to beat them. And the strategy she comes up with is to lure them into a place called the Wadi Kishon. Wadi Kishon is, what Wadi means is, it's a seasonal stream. So we live in the Pacific Northwest where there's abundant water. Thank heaven for the rain yesterday. We live in abundant water, but in desert places, there's parts of the terrain that are only filled with water in the season of the rains, in the monsoon season. The rest of the year, they're just a dry riverbed, just a dry bed. Their wadis are riverbeds that are only full of water certain times of the year, and so she lures him to this place which, when it's most of the year it's a dry riverbed, it's a good road, because a dry riverbed is a nice, hard, smooth surface to roll your chariots on. And so a lot of the year it's a good place for your 900 iron chariots to use as a kind of road to get around there. But she happens to be able to know that there's going to be a rain coming, and so she leads them to this Wadi Kishon, because the Spirit of God has told her the time and place to do this. And she gets them into this riverbed where the chariots are racing toward them, and then the flood comes, and it sinks all the wheels of the chariots into the ground, and the chariots can't move. They're worse than useless. Now they're completely, stuck, and the Israelites are able to go around and kill all the charioteers and their horses while they're stuck in the mud. Sisera, however, escapes. The general himself, he escapes, and he flees the battle, and he runs away. And he runs away to the tent of Heber the Canaanite and his wife Jael. Now this is an interesting piece of the story because it continues the theme of the women having the day. Jael is not an Israelite. She is a Kenite, which is another one of the Canaanite tribes that live around the Israelites. They're neighbors of the Israelites. In fact, her husband, Heber, has a peace treaty with the Canaanite king, Jabin and Sisera, the king and the general who are fighting against the Israelites. In other words, she's part of a clan of people who should be on the side of Sisera. She should be on the side of Jabin. Her husband has a treaty with them. They're part of that. And so Sisera comes by the tent, recognizes them as Canaanites, recognizes them as part of the people who is there. And she's like, here, come into my tent, be safe. And he trusts her and believes her because there's a peace treaty. He comes in, but she's tricking him. He comes into the tent. She offers him some safe rest, tells him to sit down, relax. He's like, give me a drink of water. And she, instead of giving him water, gives him milk, which is, in other words, it gives the emphasis of I'm being really generous in my hospitality, trying to put you at your ease. But it also is something which is, soporific, puts you to sleep. I don't know if any of you ever had, when you were younger, anyone ever tell you to drink warm milk if you couldn't sleep at night. But that's a thing in some cultures. Drink milk if you can't sleep. So she gives him some milk, and she tells him to be at ease, and he does. He goes to sleep. And then while he's asleep, she takes a tent peg and a hammer, and she puts it through his temple, kills him. And Barak and his riders, the Israelites, come up behind, trying to chase after Sisera, and she waves them down and says, here's the general that you're after. Here he is, in my tent, already gotten. This fulfills Deborah's prophecy that Sisera wouldn't be killed by a man, that he would be given over into the hands of a woman. And so what do we do with all of these themes? There are some interesting themes here for us to unpack. One is, of course, the fact that women take such a prominent role in this part of the story. The people of Israel, like all of the ancient Near Eastern cultures of the time, were patriarchal people. Men held most of the public power, they held most of the rules there. And yet, Israel, unlike their neighbors, was not rigidly patriarchal. Some of the other cultures around them, there are laws in Assyrian cultures and stuff about women not being allowed to go out in public, not being allowed to be out of the house, and there were pretty severe punishments for women who violated any of these laws. And none of that is in our Bible. None of that is in the Old Testament. None of those kinds of laws are in the Old Testament. And we see lots of exceptions to the patriarchal structure. Although men are generally expected to be the kings and commanders, there are exceptions, like Deborah here, who is clearly fulfilling all the roles of a general or a leader, doing everything that would ordinarily be a man's job. She does it, and no one questions her. No one in the text, all of the men who are following her follow her without question. They don't undermine her. They don't wonder whether or not she has the right to be there or the authority to do it. They are part of this. Now, this is interesting because this only occurs in these texts before the rise of the monarchy. So later on in this story, as we've talked about, this whole text was written later on by the kings, by the Davidic kings, trying to argue for the need for a strong monarchy. And the monarchy was fully patriarchal. And so it's interesting to see that as they write about the history, before the monarchy rises, Israel was less patriarchal. Before the kings, Israel was less patriarchal. The kings made it more patriarchal than it had been before. And there's this sort of implied idea that when the people of Israel are living really close to God, when they're really living in true faithful relationship with God, there's equality among people. And that the kings, or going into the monarchy, Israel lost something of that initial equality that they had, that they moved into being more like their neighbors, more like the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and less like themselves, less like the people whom God had initially raised up. Jael, this other character, is also interesting because she plays this role of the outside redeemer. There's lots of non-Israelite characters in the Bible, and they often are portrayed in a positive light. God uses the non-Israelites to work miracles on behalf of the people of Israel, to save the people of Israel on various occasions. The character of Rahab is an example. The character of Ruth is an example. There's multiple examples in the Bible of non-Israelite characters being used as an example or a way for God to work God's miracles. And here Jael is yet another one of these characters. And I think for our circumstances, Jael provides a particular interesting lesson. Because Jael does something really risky. she actually is a traitor to her husband. She is a traitor to the culture of her time and her people and her hospitality. Her husband, remember, had a treaty with King Jabin and Sisera. He was at peace with Jabin and Sisera. And so Sisera trusted her and went into her tent because of that peace treaty. So when she does this, when she kills Sisera, she's betraying her husband. She's betraying what he has set up. And then she's also using the established norms and rules of their culture around hospitality, which were very strong rules around hospitality, to mislead Sisera, to trick him, and then to get him into a vulnerable position where she can kill him, where she can defeat him. So she's betraying some of the things which were very strong in her life and taking a huge risk. Why would she do that? And why, not only would she do that, would the text celebrate it and say that this is an important and good thing? The text treats her as a hero because she's saving Israel from their oppressor. And I think that lets you into a clue about what the overall urgency of the text is. The text cares mostly about saving the oppressed from the oppressor. Jabin and his army of 900 iron chariots is, driving through the countryside, extracting, whatever he can get from the poor. He's taking away land, he's taking away money, he's, driving people into slavery, he's capturing people, he's taking, widows and orphans as slaves. He's doing anything he can to oppress because that's what an Iron Age king does, or a person in his position does. And the story here of liberation is about people breaking free, getting out of that oppressive situation and getting to freedom. It's about freedom, it's about liberation. And Jael, she's kind of sitting on the sidelines, She's not really part of Jabin's side. She doesn't benefit from Jabin's oppression. She doesn't get any money from it or anything. She doesn't get any wealth from it. But her husband has got a peace treaty with King Jabin, and so they're sort of third parties, but on this, more on the side of King Jabin than on the side of Israelites. And she breaks with the side of the oppressor and sides with the oppressed, even though there's really nothing in it for her. That's the key. There's really nothing in it for Jael. Jael isn't going to get a victory parade for this. She isn't going to get, wealth and fame. The Israelites are poor. They don't have anything to offer her. It's not like they can promise her wealth and fortune and dreams. In fact, she probably got in trouble from her husband and from other people around her for doing this. She took a really risky action and put herself in harm's way. And she did so, the only reason that the text can give us to do so is she did so because she believed it was right, because she believed she was helping the people who were oppressed. She believed she was rescuing people from oppression to do so. So Jael is an important character for us to consider, those of us who benefit from any kinds of privileges or comfort in our society, because we are often in an analogous position. We are often in a position where, in order to help people who are oppressed, we have to take a risk. And there really isn't that much in it for us to do it. In fact, there's lots of incentives and reasons not to do it. There's lots of incentives and reasons not to try to help people who are houseless, or people who are refugees, or people who are asylum seekers, or people who are at the bottom of our economic ladders in this country, or the bottom of our racial oppression ladders in this country. There's lots of reasons for us not to do it, and you'll hear those arguments all the time. You'll hear people say the reason why we have to close our borders and have tight immigration is because there's no more room. We can't afford to help anyone else. We can't offer anything else. You'll hear people say that the reason why we have so many houseless on our streets and can't do anything about the houseless crisis or epidemic is because we just don't have the resources. It can't be done. It's too expensive to house people or things like that. They'll say that our interests, our personal interests, are against helping the vulnerable and the oppressed in our society. That we have to be willing to take action in order to help the oppressed. We have to be willing to take action, which is risky, which sets us up in opposition to our culture. It sets us up in sometimes in opposition to our own families. I don't know about you, but I know that it's been a tough few years in a lot of families in America with people in the families having like very strong divided opinions about things and arguing about things. And if you take the side of someone who's vulnerable or oppressed, it can lead to, losing connection with family members, people cutting each other off and saying, we're not going to be part of, we're not going to come to Thanksgiving, we're not going to hang out, we're not going to be part of family anymore because you disagree with each other. I have members of my own extended family who, the arguments over the kids in cages at the border, led to them cutting us off completely, led to them cutting us off completely. So there is a risk to be had for choosing to side with the oppressed. There's a danger for choosing to side with the oppressed. And what Jael does is she takes a form of action which is so definitive. There's no going back from this, right? I mean, it's not like she sort of like passed secret quiet messages to the Israeli army and is like, here's, I'll give you some hints on something, but she can credibly claim that she didn't have any role in it, and backed away. No, the general of the opposing army is dead in her tent. There's no getting out of this for her, right? There's no going back. Her life is forever changed. She's forever now sided with the Israelites, and there's no chance that King Jabin or his armies or his people are ever going to welcome her back into their midst. She's a traitor. She's the worst kind of thing you can be in that circumstance. Worse than your enemy is people on your own side who betray you, right? Like that's the kind of risk that she took, cutting herself off from all of those people in order to be there, in order to do that. The book of Judges challenges us to imagine what heroism is. And sometimes the heroes of these stories don't conform to our cultural understandings or ideas of heroism. I mean, it's a bloody story, right? Like I'm not here today telling you that what you should do is you should, lure people into your house and then kill them while they're sleeping. That's not what I'm advocating for. So we're trying to understand ways to relate to this text and understand it in its context, but then connect it to our context and to recognize that even if we don't necessarily commend Jael for her violence, we recognize the risk she took. We recognize the choice she made to side with the oppressed in the circumstances. And we recognize that the risk she took was very permanent and definitive for her. And that kind of risk-taking is admirable. And that kind of risk-taking is heroic. And the question is, what kinds of risks are we willing to take to side with the oppressed in our own time, in our own situation? And have we ever been faced with a time and faced with a choice where we were willing to make a decision or take an action which was truly irrevocable, which would alter our lives fundamentally? May we prepare ourselves to have that kind of courage. And if the moment and the choice arises for us, may we choose to side with the oppressed no matter the cost. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor be unto them. Amen.